Today we are taking the second day of notes on completing the square. So before we do any examples, I again want to look at why we complete the square. Previously, we completed reason number 1. We solved quadratic equations using the square root method. Today we're doing objective 2. We're going to convert quadratic equations from standard form to vertex form, and then we're going to graph. So here's our first example. It says write in vertex form and graph. Currently, this is in standard form. We could definitely graph in standard form, but instead we're going to complete the square and convert it to vertex form first. As a reminder, vertex form is the y equals a, x subtract h squared, add k. And this is called vertex form because h and k are the vertex. When we completed the square before, the first thing we did was move 5 over to the other side. We're going to leave 5 and the x's on the same side of the equation today, but we're going to separate them. So we want the x's to be together and then that 5 to be off to the side. So I'm going to rewrite it so my x's are together. I'm going to put them in brackets. Now I want to complete the square within the brackets. So I left myself some room there. Remember that what goes there comes from the b term. It comes from the 6. So we're going to do 6 divided by 2, and then we're going to square it. This is a little bit different from yesterday. Yesterday, whatever I added to one side, I added to the other. Today, I'm only working on one side of the equation. So here, I added 3 squared. The inverse of adding is subtracting 3 squared. So because I added 3 squared, I also have to subtract 3 squared. And I'm going to leave that outside the brackets. I'm going to rewrite this. Now I'm ready to complete the square within the brackets. And 5 subtract 9 is negative 4. So currently we have written our parabola in vertex form. Last thing I want to do is graph. So I'm going to make myself a table. The vertex is negative 3, negative 4. So I'm also going to substitute in negative 4, negative 5, negative 2, negative 1. If I substitute in negative 2, I have negative 2, add 3, squared, subtract 4. So that ends up being 1 subtract 4, which is negative 3. Because of the symmetry of the parabola, remember that these two y's are going to match. Now if I substitute in negative 1, I have negative 1, add 3 squared, subtract 4. So that's 4, subtract 4, which is 0. So here I have 0, 0. Okay, last thing I want to do is graph. So negative 3, negative 4 is here. I have this one here, and here. Connect to make your parabola. Okay, it's opening up. I want to look at my original equation and say, does that make sense? I have a positive 1x squared, so the parabola should be opening up. So yes, this makes sense. Okay, we're going to do one more example together, and then you are going to do one on your own. Okay, here's our second example. It says, again, write in vertex form and then graph. This is a little different from the last example because we have this negative 2 here. Last example had a positive 1x squared. So this is going to be a little different, but I'm going to start out the same by keeping my x's together and writing that negative 1 off by itself. Okay, in the first video I told you we can only complete the square when we have a positive 1x squared. So now I need to get rid of this negative 2. So I'm going to factor out a negative 2 from what's in brackets. Eight divided by negative 2 is negative 4. And then that 1 is left alone because it's not in the brackets. Now I'm ready to complete the square. So I'm going to rewrite, leaving myself some room to complete the square. Okay, so what goes in that blank comes from the b term. So -4 divided by 2 squared. Remember that whenever I add, I also have to subtract. So from -1, I have to subtract -2 squared. Here's the part that's a little tricky. Please remember that we factored out a -2. So this right here is being multiplied by this -2. So when I subtract -2 squared, I need to multiply it by the -2 that's outside the brackets. I'll rewrite this so it looks a little nicer. And this 4 just comes from that -2 squared. Now I'm ready to complete the square. And then I have -1 add 8. So last step is simplifying. Okay, so we've written it currently in vertex form. Again, does this make sense? We have a -2 here, -2 here, so both of the parabolas open down. That makes sense. Last thing we want to do is graph. So make yourself a table. I'm going to erase a little bit so that I have some room, so hopefully you copy this down. Okay, our vertex is 2, 7. So I'm going to substitute in 1, 0, 3, 4. Substituting in 0, I have -2, 0, subtract 2 squared, add 7. 0 subtract 2 is 2, square that is 4, multiplied by -2 is -8, add 7. So that ends up being -1. So here I have a -1. Because of the symmetry, this is also going to be a -1. Now I want to substitute in 1. I have -2, 1 subtract 2 squared, add 7. 1 subtract 2 is -1, squared is 1, multiplied by -2, this becomes -2, add 7, which is 5. Because of the symmetry, this should also be 5. Last step, let's graph this. So our vertex 2, 7 is up here. And then I have 1, 5, and 3, 5. I have 0, -1, and 4, -1. And then this is opening down, which we already talked about should be the case. So that looks good. One more example that you're going to do on your own. If you would please now pause the video, try this one on your own. I just want you to convert from standard form to vertex form. You don't have to graph. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you've tried this one. We're going to go through it together now. First thing that you should have done is separate the x's from that -40. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, now we have a 4x squared, we want 1x squared. So you need to factor out a 4. I'm going to leave myself some room since I'm going to complete the square. Now what goes in that blank comes from the -6. So -6 divided by 2 squared. Because I added that, I have to subtract from the same side in order to keep my equations the same. So I'm going to subtract -3 squared. Now remember, we have this 4 that we factored out, which is being multiplied by that. So when we subtract -3 squared, we have to multiply it from the 4 that's outside parentheses. Now I'm going to rewrite, just so that it looks a little nicer. Okay, now I'm ready to complete the square. So I have x subtract 3 squared. subtract 40, subtract 36. 9 multiplied by 4 is 36. Last step is to just simplify this a little bit more. So y is equal to 4x subtract 3 squared subtract 76. And now our equation has been converted from standard form to vertex form. When you come into class tomorrow, or later today if you're watching the video today, we'll be doing a few more examples and working on some homework.